This is the Business Briefing. I'm Susannah Streeter. After Black Thursday comes Friday the 13th. Investors brace for more chaos after the worst day on the market since 1987. Plus, travel bans, cancellations and staff layoffs. How the pandemic is bringing the tourism industry to its knees. And let's just show you those markets. The global collapse continues in Asia after US shares slumped 10% on Thursday. Japan's Nikkei is currently down around 6%. Well, we start on the markets where investors are reeling from Black Thursday and they're now braced to see what Friday the 13th will bring. Stock markets in the United States and Europe had their worst day since 1987 on fears the coronavirus pandemic will cause a global recession. US shares lost around 10% despite a massive intervention by the Federal Reserve, the central bank. And the selling is continuing in Asia. We'll bring you the latest in a moment. But first, this report from Samira Hussain in New York.
For the second time this week, trading was halted on U.S. financial markets after falling more than 7%, a threshold that automatically triggers a temporary stop to trading. The safety measure was put in place in 1987 and hasn't been used since 1997. And this week, it was used twice. Markets are tanking. Wall Street is spooked. And investors are desperate for direction from the Trump administration.
This market is getting very unsatisfied with any news and headlines that we're seeing. I think the market is expecting our government to step in, is expecting the Fed to make a statement, expecting our president to make a statement. And until the market gets that, we're going to continue to see this pricing.
The strain is not just being felt in the stock market. Down the road from the exchange at the New York Fed, traders for the central bank waded into the market in U.S. government debt, increasing their planned purchase of government bonds by $1.5 trillion. Briefly, that looked like it might calm some investor nerves. But what financial markets are really looking for is dramatic action from Congress and the White House to try and soften the blow the coronavirus is having on the heart of the U.S. economy. But for now, there's little sign of that happening. Samira Hussain, BBC News, New York.
Well, let's see how Asia is faring. Mariko Oy is in Singapore. Mariko, any sign that investors' nerves are being eased?
Well, I have to say that some of the markets here in Asia have been managing to narrow their losses. I wouldn't dare try and guess what's causing that in this very volatile market, but I think it might be safe to assume that there's a bit of bargain hunting going on. You talked about Japan's Nikkei. It was at one point down by almost 10%, but now it's starting to narrow its losses in the final hour of trading. We also saw Australia's market managing to turn back into the positive territory. It's also very important to point out that the Chinese market, the mainland Chinese markets, they've been doing quite okay despite volatility. But if you look at some of the airline shares, they've been hit hard in the US, but also here in Asia after President Trump's announcement of travel restrictions or travel ban from much of Europe to the United States. Also, interestingly, that we've been talking to a lot of analysts today that how we've been comparing it to the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. But he pointed out that back then there was no virus outbreak, of course, but there were no travel restrictions or no travel bans, no school closures, no theme park closures. And with all those economic activities suspended, we are now seeing a real possibility of the world falling into a global recession.
OK, Mariko, thank you very much for that update for the markets in Asia. And let's stay with the economic impact of the pandemic because shares of companies in the travel industry have been among the hardest hit. The latest blow, of course, has been President Trump's ban on travel between the US and 26 European countries. Now, that comes in at midnight tonight, Eastern US time. But it's not the only sweeping travel ban in place. India has suspended almost all visas for a month. And travel companies are being forced to scale back or even halt their operations. Princess Cruises, whose ships were quarantined off California and Japan in recent weeks, is shutting down for 2 months, affecting all of its 18 vessels. And airlines are cancelling hundreds of flights and laying off staff as passenger demand slumps.
Most people would say this is the most significant impact we've seen since probably 9/11. Passenger numbers and passenger bookings, forward bookings, are all down across the UK, and that's having a really bad knock-on impact on airports. So we're seeing, traffic numbers down by anything between sort of 25%, 50% and upwards, depending on which airport you are.
Well, let's discuss more about this with David Tash, who's from Forward Keys, a travel data company. Hello there, David.
Well, hello, Susannah.
The impact is absolutely huge, not least from the spread of the coronavirus around the world and fears people have over travelling. But now this travel ban from the United States, what impact will that alone have on the travel industry?
Well, in a word, Susannah, catastrophic. What we see from Donald Trump's ban is that there will be over 6,700 flights cancelled. If you count that by seats, that's 2 million seats taken straight out of the market. So all the measures that we've heard about from governments really won't scratch the surface in terms of fixing the economic damage that's going on at the moment to some of the companies in the travel industry.
We've seen the share prices of many travel firms fall quite dramatically, but some just in line with the general stock market falls. Do you think this will mean that we should expect further falls, for example, the airlines?
Well, it's possible. I'm not speaking as a stock market analyst. Much more Forward Keys is looking at flight booking data, and what we're seeing in flight booking data is absolutely unprecedented. So, for example, the first week of March, we had a look at what was happening in terms of outbound bookings from the United States to the rest of the world. And what we saw was that there were more cancellations than new bookings. I mean, that's extraordinary. We had a look at inbound flight bookings to Europe, and we saw in the last week of February that there were more cancellations than new bookings to Italy. And we saw that bookings to Europe were 79% down against the equivalent week last year. That's unprecedented levels of collapse on a large scale.
And the hope is, of course, that those bookings will be shifted until later in the year or early next year. But there's no guarantee of that, is there?
You're absolutely right. And what we've seen with other travel crises, actually, is that people really want to travel. And often when there's some kind of difficulty in one part of the world, they don't stop traveling, they just go somewhere else. We saw a fascinating thing happening in the United States around the middle of last year, where there was rumours of things going wrong because of some unexplained deaths in the Dominican Republic. And when we tracked what was happening in the US market, bookings for the Dominican Republic collapsed, but for other Caribbean islands, they rocketed.
Absolutely, but there's no guarantee of people choosing to go on alternative holidays anytime soon. David, thank you very much for talking to us about just the impact, the severe impact on the travel industry. OK, let's stay with the pandemic impact on the industry, because many destinations have come to rely on visitors from China and few more than Thailand. More than 10 million Chinese come to Thailand every year, many of them heading to the beaches of the southern islands like Phuket. BBC's Jonathan Head has been finding out how Phuket is coping without them.
The famed beaches are still the same, but one factor behind Phuket's roaring success is missing: the Chinese. 2 million used to visit this tropical island every year. Today, you hardly see them at all. This lady used to sell 100 coconuts a day. The Chinese were big spenders, she says. These days, she's lucky to sell 20.
We have many charter flights from China to Phuket. They stop. Scheduled flight, they stop. We have about 8,000 to 10,000 tourists a day. But today, We have maybe about 600 to 800 tourists.
Natakit Lowat Warawat has been running boat tours from Phuket for 12 years. Most of his passengers were Chinese tourists, so he's had to take 20 of his 30 boats out of the water.
ก็ต้องลดไซส์ธุรกิจลงอีก
If it doesn't get better by the end of this year, he said, we'll have to downsize the company and start laying off employees.
ลดทุกอย่างลง
So just how much do you have to pay out every month for your business?
ครับผมเดือนหนึ่งผมต้อง
It's even tougher for those lower down the food chain like van operator Somkiat Prasan. He has payments on his house and 2 cars of around $1,500 a month. For him, even 6 months is too long.
You can't survive that long.
cannot sir
Cannot.
yeah we got no job.
Tourism in this country has been amazingly resilient. It survived global recessions, a tsunami, military coups, and even other virus scares. But the problem with this one is nobody yet has any idea how long it's going to last, nor how serious it's going to be.
Tourism accounts for around 1/5 of economic output in this country, and the rest of the economy is not doing well. Thailand can ill afford a crisis here, yet there's little it can do against a virus whose full impact is still impossible to gauge. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Phuket.
Up next is a news briefing.